So for the past 2 days, we've been talking about different categories of comedy, different elements of comedy. And so today I want to go a little bit more in depth about what these terms mean by exploring the different elements that go into actually creating humor. Specifically, we're going to spend some time working with caricature and irony today. And so before we get started, I want to make sure you have your comedy vocab worksheets with you because we're going to be talking about some more terms today that I want you to fill in on those sheets. And so if you need to go get them or download them again, just pause the video for a second, go grab them, get situated, and we can get started. So some of you have maybe heard the word caricature before, and maybe you've had a caricature drawn at a street fair, or you've seen the cartoons that create caricatures of political figures or celebrities like this. And so these are called caricatures because they're portraits of a person, but one feature is especially exaggerated, like we can see with Morgan Freeman's teeth or Justin Bieber's head. And so while these are great examples of caricatures, the type of caricature that we're going to talk about today is actually literary caricature. And so literary caricature functions the same way as the drawings do, but through the use of descriptive words. So a caricature would be defined as an exaggerated description of a person. And these are different from normal character descriptions because they're much more detailed, and they're usually used to point out a flaw, poke fun at someone, or draw attention to a specific character trait. And so now I want to ask you, does this description sound familiar to you? Because it should. This is very similar to the way that we described satire, comedy that uses sarcasm and wit to make fun of someone for the purpose of pointing out a flaw. And often caricature is the device that authors and satirists use to create satire. Here is an example of literary caricature. We loved Mrs. Sellers, but we always avoided asking her for help. Anytime she was within a 2-foot radius, the smell of burnt, stale coffee assaulted your nostrils, and God forbid she ever leaned over your shoulder to help with a problem. My papers are still speckled with the brown spit stains. Here, Mrs. Sellers' caricature is drawing attention to her coffee breath, a trait that her students clearly were not a fan of. In class tomorrow, we will be working a lot with caricature and the way it affects the reader's perception of a character. Next up is irony. This can be a tricky concept to understand, so I want you to take a quick look at this video.
Picture this. Your friend and you are watching a sitcom, and the sassy sidekick walks into a room carrying a 4-tiered wedding cake. He trips, falls, and face plants into the cake. Your friend doubles over with laughter and says, "So ridiculous! So ironic!" Well, quick, what do? Do you laugh along with the laugh track and let this grievous misinterpretation of irony go? Or do you throw caution to the wind and explain the true meaning of irony? If you're me, you choose the latter. Unfortunately, irony has been completely misunderstood. We tend to throw out that term whenever we see something funny or coincidental. And while many examples of true irony can be funny, that is not the driving factor of being ironic. A situation is only ironic if what happens is the exact opposite of what was expected. If you expect A, but get B, then you have irony. Let's take the slapstick cake situation as an example. When someone walks in, precariously balancing something that shouldn't be carried alone, trips, falls, and makes a mess, it is funny, but it's not ironic. In fact, you probably expect someone who is single-handedly carrying a huge cake to trip. When he does, reality aligns with expectations, and so that is not irony. But what if the sassy sidekick walked in wearing a gold medal that he'd won at the cakewalking event at the Atlanta Olympics in 1996? What if that sidekick was a professional cake carrier? Then, maybe there would have been a reasonable expectation that he would have been more skilled when carrying a ridiculously large cake. Then, when that reasonable expectation was not met by the tripping sidekick, irony would have been exemplified. Another example. A senior citizen texting and blogging. The common and reasonable expectation of more mature men and women is that they don't like or know technology, that they have a hard time turning on a computer, or that they have the old brick cell phones from the 1980s. One should not expect them to be connected, high-tech, or savvy enough to text or to be blogging, which must seem like some sort of newfangled thing that back in my day they never had. So when Granny pulls out her smartphone to post pictures of her dentures or her grandkids, irony ensues. Reasonable expectations of the situation are not met. That is irony. So while the cake dropper might not be ironic, there are all kinds of situations in life that are. Go out and find those true examples of irony.
So, the most important thing to remember about irony, then, is that it has to involve a violation of expectations. So, just because something funny happens doesn't mean it's ironic. Check out these other examples of situational irony. These situations are ironic because they contradict what would normally be expected. A fire station burns down. The marriage counselor files for divorce. The police station gets robbed. We wouldn't think that a person whose job to help counsel people about their marriage would ever file for a divorce themselves, would we? We wouldn't expect the very building who's in charge of putting out fires to set on fire. So, can you think of any other examples of situational irony? Be sure to brainstorm so you can share these ideas in class tomorrow. Situational irony isn't the only type of irony out there. There are two other important types of irony that you should be aware of. The first is verbal irony. This is what happens when someone says something that contradicts what is actually happening. For example, if someone were to exclaim, "Oh great," after failing an exam, or if someone were to turn to their friend and say, "It looks beautiful outside, even though it's storming." Certainly, failing an exam isn't great, and stormy weather isn't beautiful. These people are being ironic. Irony doesn't always have to be funny, though. Sometimes irony can be dramatic, and this kind of irony occurs when the audience knows something that the characters in the story do not. The most classic example of this is Romeo and Juliet, when Romeo thinks that Juliet is dead, and so he kills himself, preventing their love story from ever working out. And this is especially ironic because the entire time we all know that Juliet is still alive. Dramatic irony is not used in comedy as often as situational and verbal irony are. So, let's recap. Caricature is an exaggerated description of a person, usually a particular character trait. This is often used in high comedy because this type of comedy focuses on characterization to create humor. Irony, on the other hand, can be found in both low comedy and high comedy. For example, in the video on situational irony, we saw the man fall with a giant cake in his hands, creating physical humor, an example of low comedy. But high comedy also relies on irony to create humor through sarcasm and wordplay. Verbal irony. When it comes to irony, the most important thing to remember is that it can only occur when there is a certain expectation that has been contradicted. So make sure that you've been filling out your comedy vocab worksheets. There's no extra homework for today, so once you finish this video and filled out those worksheets, you should be good to go, and then I will see you in class tomorrow.